No one is illegal on stolen land.
A few moments later.
We talked to the Tongva tribe out in southern Cal who says she's living on their property, saying this in part as the first people of the greater Los Angeles basin. We do understand that her home is situated on our ancestral land. Eilish hasn't contacted her tribe directly regarding her property.
So I regret to inform you, but it appears that pretentious celebrities and their unwarranted political opinions have made a full comeback in America. We were having a nice few years there after the Dylan Mulvaney stuff where they stayed relatively quiet, but I guess ever since ICE started deporting their Guatemalan illegal alien butlers, suddenly it's been World War III over in Hollywood.
I just wanted to say that I'm so sorry. All my people are getting attacked. The children. I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something, but I can't. I don't know what to do. I'll try everything, I promise.
Yeah, well, it's certainly nothing new for their narcissistic, grandstanding displays to ultimately be hypocritical and ridiculous, but I do want to speak about the Grammys today, particularly singer Billie Eilish, who tried to give this whole speech against what ICE is doing, weaponizing the slogan that is very common among left-wingers that nobody is illegal on stolen land, only for that display to end in her getting called out by the Native Americans who are pointing out that actually your mansion sits on stolen land, quote unquote, that was taken from us. Which is probably the most satisfying check to one of these ridiculous moments that I think I've ever seen. You know, I think it's a prime case as to why these celebrities really ought to shut up. And if they're going to give political opinions, at least give them from a place of being relatively informed and not just sound and look like idiots every single time. You don't even know what that means, right? Nobody's illegal on stolen land. Clearly not. Right? You have no idea why you're even applying that logic considering you live on stolen land. But hey, we'll tell you about this here today, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, I mean, we saw a lot of just, you know, typical garbage at the Grammys, but take a listen here to the specific anti-ICE little moment that Billie Eilish tries to give, which she doesn't sound stupid at all. You know, she totally sounds like she knows what she's talking about here, including the part about the stolen land.
No one is illegal on stolen land. And yeah, it's just really hard to know what to say and what to do right now. And I feel really hopeful in this room, and I feel like we just need to keep fighting and speaking up and protesting, and our voices really do matter, and the people matter, and I say sorry.
So you gotta love how Sabrina Carpenter and whoever this person are just clapping like seals, you know? Yeah, so true, Queen. You're speaking truth to power. Oh my! It's so theatrical, you know? And you juxtapose that with what she's actually saying, because let's be honest, she sounds like an idiot. She doesn't even know what she's saying. Literally, what does she say, right? Like, I don't know what to say right now, but like, we gotta keep using our voices and speaking up. Wow, the most compelling, passionate, dynamic speech I ever heard in my life. This is so powerful. And then leftists will watch this display, right? We have Sabrina Carpenter, we have Billie Eilish, we have a bunch of millionaires. We have, apparently they brought Pocahontas here to, you know, continue the Native American representation and show how much I guess they agree with it. I don't know what's going on here, right? But people will watch the Grammys entirely be a propaganda session for their own political opinions. And then left-wingers will still frame themselves as if they are somehow these grassroots people who are fighting the elite, standing up to the man. You know, like, at what point do you begin to notice that every single one of your political opinions genuinely comes from the institutions? Whether that's Hollywood, whether that's the celebrities or mainstream media or academic institutions, even the financial ones, despite how much you claim to be against the billionaires, you know. But yeah, sure, like, look at this. They're all standing up for the common man. All, you know, Pocahontas right here, you know, she really cares about the plight of the Latino community. Of course, we have Hollywood celebrities, and by the way, it wasn't just her. You know, basically every speech that night is virtue signaling about how much they love our so-called immigrant neighbors and diversity, despite the fact that none of these people actually live around said immigrant neighbors or diversity. But that said, let's get into it, okay? I actually would like to address this nobody's illegal on stolen land argument, because it's something we've heard left-wingers say for years, and I just like to say I still have no clue what it's even supposed to mean. So let's address that, right? Nobody's illegal on stolen land. Well, I think logical response number one, and maybe the most basic thing that everyone says in response to this, is absolutely true, though. Okay, so if it's stolen land, then why don't you give it back, you know? Why don't white liberals go back to Europe? Non-white liberals can go back to whatever country they came from, because after all, right, it's stolen land, right? So just return the land then. Oh, no, we can't do that. Okay, so then why are you virtue signaling about it? Like what is actually the point of going out and saying that the land is stolen if you're not going to give it back, right? Because if that's the moral framing by which you're going to claim this all happened, okay? So imagine, for example, someone goes and robs a bank, and then they turn around to everyone else and say, if they turn to the government, the police, everyone, they say, well, we're really sorry that we stole the money, and the police, besides arresting you, are probably going to say, hey, where's the money? Give us back these stolen assets. Oh, no, well, we're not going to do that, but we're going to apologize to you. There is no function to that. As a matter of fact, it's probably even more pretentious. Imagine someone stole your car, right? And the thief actually comes to you and says, hey, I stole your car. And you're like, what the F, man? Then give me back my car. You just stole it from me. No, I'm not going to do that. But I'll give a speech about what a bad person I am. What is the point of this exercise, right? It's empty. It's stupid. We call it virtue signaling for a reason. But that's obviously what, Hollywood specializes in, because after all, what are they? They're actors. Everything they do is theatrical and fake. And, I think another prime example, the same as their political opinions. But okay, we've known that for a very long time. And as it so turns out, Billie Eilish is an individual who chose to buy her mansion on native, ancestral, so-called stolen land. The same is true of a company like Ben & Jerry's ice cream. You know, the Bernie Sanders ice cream that's printing all these left-wing messages, but literally, like, their manufacturing plant, their headquarters, sits on quote-unquote stolen Native American land. But secondly, even taking Billie Eilish out of it, I'd like to also point out that even the slogan itself, because they say it all the time, nobody's illegal on stolen land, is completely incoherent. Like, it actually doesn't make sense, right? They scream it as if it's so smart. Look, we just proved everyone wrong. Those right-wing fascists who want to have borders, how dare they? Don't you know nobody's illegal on stolen land? No, that actually doesn't make any sense. Why? Why can't people be illegal on stolen land? Has that ever actually been explained, right? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, first and foremost, shouldn't everybody be illegal on stolen land if it's stolen land? Like, logically, wouldn't that be the case? If we're all stealing the land, don't we all owe it back to the Native Americans? No, but that would be a problem, of course, because then that would actually mean you would have to do something about it, right? Liberals would have an obligation to give back the land, which frankly, I think would be a very good compromise to make with the Native Americans, That's fine. Like, the liberals have to go back to whatever country their ancestry is from. The natives can have the empty land. Everybody wins. But of course, right, that's never going to happen, which is why they say nobody's illegal on stolen land, even though it should be the exact opposite. And even then, what is the argument? So because European settlers came here hundreds of years ago, therefore, it's immoral for the country to have immigration laws in the year 2026? Why? Why is that immoral? Why is that wrong? There's no answer, right? Because, like I said, the slogan doesn't actually make any sense. Now, not to be obtuse, I actually understand what they're basically trying to say, and what they're trying to argue is that, Well, because Europeans came here in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s. Therefore, they were immigrants. And because that means, therefore, America was, quote unquote, built by immigrants, the Somali Quality Learning Center owners and, illegal aliens from all over the world who come through the southern border, they're just the same as the European settlers. And therefore, they ought to have a moral right to stay here, which falls apart on a number of different options. First of all, it's just insanely ridiculous and disingenuous to compare in any way. Let's say, for example, right, Christopher Columbus or the Jamestown settlers or even Lewis and Clark who, charted the West, to say Somali Quality Learning Center owners who basically just come to the United States of America when it's already been settled, built, developed, and just for the sheer purpose of living off government benefits. Because first and foremost, okay, I'm sure I'm not the first person you've ever heard make this point, but it is true. America was not, quote unquote, built by immigrants. It was built by settlers, if you're referring to the, original Europeans who came over here, because the official definition of an immigrant is somebody who comes to an established society and attempts to integrate into that society, right? So for example, the Ellis Islanders, you could say, are immigrants. You could even say some of the later colonists who came over after the 13 colonies or New Spain or whatever are already established, that sure, you could refer to those people as immigrants. But no, the original Europeans who came here did not attempt to integrate into native society. In many cases, they found open wilderness with no society that existed, and they went and built their own society. So you could call them settlers, you could even call them conquerors, but nobody's ever tried to make the argument, for example, that say, the Roman legions, right? Romans just immigrated to North Africa, or they just immigrated to southern England or places like that, because that's just ridiculous. No, when you go to establish a new society, you're either a settler, you're a conqueror, you're a little bit of both, but not immigrants, right? But why does the left do this? Because they love to compare things that are not remotely the same, and that's basically the entire nature of their discourse, is because, yeah, they're trying to basically make the case that Lewis and Clark and Somali fraudsters, there's no difference between them right there. Of course, exactly the same. All of that said, okay, even all of that in mind, I'd like to lastly make the argument here that I think it's worth pointing out what Europeans did to the Native Americans and the Indians, right? Like what actually happened there. Because if you're going to make the case to other Americans out there, oh, the refugees setting up quality learning centers, they're just like Christopher Columbus, they're just like Jamestown, right? Then if you're going to make that comparison, that it's the same, right? I think it's worth pointing out what the Europeans actually did to the existing Native American and Indian societies that were already there. Because it's a just factual matter of history that essentially what happened is that the Europeans decimated the natives. They essentially wiped out what existed barely of Native American society. And sure, we have some remnants today, but undeniably, basically what you could call a decimation and wide-scale erasure took place. Now, I'm not here to do some woke apology tour for it, because to me, it's, frankly, the story of history, right? The natives conquered the other natives. Europeans came over here. They're more powerful than they conquer the natives, right? And frankly, this idea that native society was so peaceful, whether that's the Aztecs or the ones up here in the modern United States, is just ridiculous. It's revisionist history, right? But all of that said, okay, so if you're going to compare the illegal aliens and refugees of today to those Europeans, then is your argument that those people are coming here to literally destroy America, right? To decimate and wipe out the society that already existed? Because again, that's what the Europeans did to the native societies. So if they're just like the European settlers, then that's actually an accidental admission by leftists that the illegal aliens coming here are not your friends, they're not your neighbors, they're actually trying to tear down your society, destroy you, and decimate you. I didn't say that, they said that, right? Which is why, of course, none of this makes any sense, although, I don't know, like I said, maybe that's actually admission of what they are using immigration to do. Of course, if I try to make the argument to these people, illegal aliens are destroying this country, right? They're going to say, that's racist, how dare you say that? But actually, you're the one saying that. If you're going to make this whole, nobody is illegal on stolen land argument. So just something I like to point out. But anyways, as it pertains here to Billie Eilish, it's to take a listen here to how this very predictably ends, because the Indians themselves basically say to her, well, if that's the slogan you're going to sell to the world, then why not live it out? Take a listen.
According to a local tribe out in California, she built her mansion on property that belongs to Native Americans. We talked to the Tongva tribe out in southern Cal, who says she's living on their property, saying this in part, as the first people of the greater Los Angeles basin, we do understand that her home is situated on our ancestral land. Eilish hasn't contacted her tribe directly regarding her property. So back in 2020, comedian Ricky Gervais was ahead of this. He said, please do not get up here and use the stage as a platform for politics, saying in part, you're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. Now mocking Grammy winners because he said they're doing it again, saying they're still not listening. So celebrities had their pins on that said ICE out at the Grammys, but DHS says while they were kind of complaining on stage, their team was arresting people in Minnesota, dozens of people who they say were in the country illegally, like sex offenders, child abusers, and criminals convicted of assault, according to DHS. And it's not the first time Billie Eilish has called out ICE, okay? She says that the agency is a terrorist organization and is called to defund the police, but it's the same police she called back in 2023 when investigators say someone broke into her California home. So we'll see what she has to say about it now.
Yeah, so Billie Eilish, if nobody's illegal on stolen land and you as a white colonizer refuse to give back your stolen land to the Indians, then how would you respond if the Tongva Indians showed up to your house and just decided to take it back? They just started trespassing on the property. They started squatting. Would you have a problem with that, right? You're invading my borders. You're invading my private property. You're not allowed to be here. Or would you surrender it and say, well, it's stolen land, right? Nobody's illegal. Of course, we know the answer to that because as they point out in that news segment, the last time someone tried to trespass on her property, she, of course, called the police. That's illegal. This is my property. This is my area. You're not allowed to be here. But wait, I thought nobody's illegal on stolen land. Don't you know? Right? You have a moral obligation to apparently just allow criminals into your house because that's what you're advocating for the country, right? So why can't the Tongva Indians, as just one example, take back their stolen land then, right? And what would happen if they just showed up to your house and start living in it? Is that okay? Well, it should be, right? Nobody's illegal on stolen land. That's the immigration policy you obviously support for America. So again, there you have it, right? And I repeat that if you're going to argue that the immigrants of today are the same as the European settlers who took out the existing society essentially, then shouldn't it be then the moral obligation of the existing Americans who already live here to resist the invaders that you're like accidentally admitting that they are, right? Because if left-wingers are constantly going to celebrate, let's say, the Native Americans for their resistance against the white settlers or, all these different anti-colonial leaders throughout history, then is not what ICE is doing right now, is not what conservative Americans support, is that not by definition anti-colonialism, right? Because literally what we're advocating for is resistance, peaceful resistance, but resistance against the invasion, takeover, and ultimately destruction of our own society. You basically have argued that to us, right? So I don't know. I'm just saying now, of course, I don't know why I'm even wasting the time making these arguments because, Billie Eilish doesn't know what she's talking about. After all, she just said a slogan she saw on some Instagram infographic and then proceeded to say, like, keep using our voices or something like that. But, just a common argument I like to address about the immigration as a whole, because these things make no sense. And by the way, I'd further like to ask, obviously we understand most illegal immigration comes from Latin America, and that's usually what these celebrities and left-wingers claim they're standing up for as Latino people. But even on that front, by the way, when did Hispanics and Latinos ever gain moral superiority over Americans when it comes to so-called colonization, imperialism, stealing land, etc.? Because all of those countries, with the exception of the Portuguese ones and the ones other, countries settled ultimately, but the vast majority of them south of our border were a part of what was once called New Spain, right? It's a colonial byproduct. And by the way, if you're a Latino person with at least 1% Spanish DNA, which is most of them, then you too are a colonizer, right? You're a product of the conquistadors. So what makes you exactly better? Like, what's the difference between Hernan Cortez and any of the English settlers? What's the difference between New Spain and New England? You know? Like, these are the same people who try to argue, oh, well, you know, America stole land from Mexico, all because basically they lost the Mexican-American War, and that suddenly makes them morally superior just because they lost the war. Because how is the history of Mexico any different from the history of America when it comes to colonization? They're both former European colonies who ultimately gained their own independence and new national identity, right? They're both byproducts of colonialism. Latinos are not any morally superior to, let's say, ancestral white Americans from 1776. In the end, they're basically the same, right? Now, you could argue, oh, well, the Spanish had more interbreeding with the native population, but it doesn't really make that big a difference. I mean, most white Americans from 1776, when they do a DNA test, you know, you'll find very common, right? A 1% Native American, 1 in 10, 24th, like Elizabeth Warren. So, like seriously, what is the difference between, what's the moral superiority that Latino countries have over America or Canada when it comes to colonization or imperialism? You're the exact same, right? Essentially, the only historical grievance is that they lost, and ultimately, in the end, America was a little bit better at that manifest destiny and kind of building a large country, a land empire, you could call it, than, say, Mexico or New Spain or any of those countries were. Like, what's the argument here? I don't understand, right? So, just some things I'd like to bring up if you're going to keep citing this just stolen land garbage. You know, it's like, you know, Mexico, you hear that a lot too. America was, or a lot of America, the western part was stolen from Mexico, so therefore we can't be illegal on that land. Okay, but you stole it as well. Like, you also stole it from the natives. Now, sometimes they try to claim that they're natives or whatever, but no, like Mexico, again, is not any less colonistic or imperialistic than America ever has been. So, you know, just a ridiculous argument all around. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.